One of these days, I'm going to be tech savvy. So, this is the third take on Hug Your White Friends, episode 4. And as always, well, not as always, but last week we had a special guest, my dear friend Bonnie Mac. And this week we also have a special guest that I'm hoping will add to the live relatively quickly and join us in today's conversation because I think it's going to be awesome and amazing. While we're waiting for that special friend to show up, I just want to say happy Juneteenth. I hope that everyone is finding a way to celebrate Black culture, Black life, Black stories, and Black history, because that is what Jubilee Day is all about. I am so pleased that so many people in the world right now are having conversations about what it means to be Black in the United States, what it means to be descendants of slaves, and still waiting for our special guests, but for some reason I can't invite them to join us in the room, and so that's very interesting, and I'm going to be trying to figure out how to get them involved. Like I said, one become much more tech savvy than I am right now. All right, let's see. Okay, I think give us a few more. Some technical issues. I'm so sorry and appreciate your patience. You can always exit the room and come back in like 2-3 minutes. Hopefully we'll have it all situated by then. While you're here though, I'd love to get in the comments what you all are doing to celebrate Juneteenth as we're waiting for our special guest. I just feel so bad for hanging up on people while this is going on. Great. So any minute now, you're going to see 2 people on screen. And I'm so excited about the conversation we're going to have today. Yay!
Hey!
This is our special guest for today, Noelle Allison, which is my friend, my dear friend. And I'm so excited that we're having this conversation today, Noelle.
Yeah.
Even though it took a very long time for us to get all the technical stuff going on.
Sorry.
And so, you know, in my real life, not just on Juneteenth, I spent a lot of time thinking about slavery. You could testify to that.
Yes.
That's my one party trick. Not that slavery is not a party trick, everyone. And so today, in honor of our ancestors, I actually woke up really, really early and started reading slave narratives, which for some people that might seem really, really intense. But that's kind of what I chose to do to start the day. And I was reading a slave narrative by a woman. Her name was Mary Reynolds. And by the time she gets interviewed, she's living in Dallas, Texas, but she was enslaved in Black River, Louisiana. All right.
Okay.
I don't think Black River, Louisiana exists right now. I think it's an offshoot of the Ouachita River. All right.
Okay.
So I'm thinking she was enslaved in North Louisiana.
Okay.
But her narrative talks about when the Yankees came to, their plantation, and her experience of that interaction. And so the Yankees came and they kind of came to the plantation, took materials, and then left. And at that point, her master, which I don't understand why he might have also been on a plantation, maybe he didn't fight for the war or whatever, but he tries to get the remaining slaves to go with him to Galveston, Texas, right?
Oh, wow.
Isn't that impactful, right? So, because we know that a lot of people, like Texas was the last stronghold, so much, it was a very limited Union presence in Texas. So that's why a lot of slave masters took their remaining slaves, took them in Texas, and they stayed slaves for the next 2 years, right?
Right.
So here's Mary Reynolds talking about her master trying to get them all together and gathering them to go to Texas, right? And from her narrative, I get the idea that her mom actually did go with the master, and Mary ended up um, staying where she was. But then the mistress of the house, a woman by the name of Miss Sarah, I believe, shortly after sends a letter to Mary Reynolds requesting her to come back to Texas to work for her, right?
Okay.
So it's a
Yeah.
really interesting thing to, this history, but slave narratives just always solidify it. And the
Right.
idea that Miss Sally would request Mary, her slave, right,
Right.
to return back to Texas with her after this woman has been freed says a lot about some white lady stuff.
Yeah,
Would
yeah,
we
yeah.
agree?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of what we're doing today, is extending the conversation about, I think, what white women have been dawn of all time. That's today's conversation.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that I think that there's the maybe the seeds of how well, maybe not the seeds, probably more like the foundation, right? Of how white women are very comfortable consuming the emotional and physical and intellectual labor of Black women and having no clue the actual cost of that to those women,
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about this woman, the random white woman from, history, who had at
Yeah.
one point owned Mary Reynolds. And I don't need to imagine what was going on in her head when she sends Mary a letter saying, hey, come back to Texas with me and work for me,
Yeah.
right? But I think it's interesting because it says something about what the expectations were on Mary as a Black woman who had recently been freed, but the expectations on Sally as a white woman who maybe for the first time in her life was expected to do something.
Right.
So I guess one of the things that I think is worth noting is, like, have women, Black, white, have the expectations always been the same about what we're doing in the world we live in?
So you're asking how, sorry, my reception is not awesome on my phone.
It's
So
okay.
you're asking about how are the expectations, how do those have that sort of consistently been the same throughout history,
Well,
even into how we interact today?
Do you think that at the point where Mary is free,
Right.
she gets to have the same expectations as Sally in her life?
Oh, like if Mary had written Sally and said, hey, well, I can't come down there, but how you come up and work? Tell you what, Sally, I got a spot for you up here.
What's the difference between a Sally and a Mary? 1865, but even 2020.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I could definitely see that that same dynamic at play now, where
How
folks
so?
who, I even have a specific example, except I can't quite get there. Well, we are having, seems like we're having sort of a new cultural awakening to the realities of systemic racism and how pervasive it is, and as white folks, our own sort of recognition of our internalized bias and all that stuff. So there's a huge wave of that happening on the internet right now, right? And
Oh, you
there are a
mean
number
all the
of,
people who realize racism is real?
right, and just found out yesterday we were white.
Wait,
But
y'all just
I
found
know,
that out too?
I
Those are
know
two
it.
big
It's
things.
been a
So
week, Tina.
wait, white people just found out they were white, and y'all just found out that
Right.
racism is real?
Yep. I know. I may really need you to hold my hand through all of this because I don't know if I can.
Do you need a hug, Noelle?
I do, and a couple of cookies if you have them. Sorry. No, but we have friends through the Pass the Mic Facebook group who, when Trump was elected, were significantly harmed. There was significant emotional damage and relationship damage done by white parishioners of their churches, right? Within a church setting, a lot of white ladies did a lot of harm to a lot of black ladies around the issue of why not just why would you vote for Trump? I think there's a lot of, it's like, it's not that you voted for him as much as when I expressed my hurt and my sadness at that as a black woman, you diminished that and gaslighted me and were threatened by that, right? So there are these broken and kind of ragged edged relationships that have been sitting there for a few years. Now, so many more people are discovering, oh my gosh, I'm white, I'm complicit, I'm XYZ, and going back and not recognizing the harm that had been previously done, but instead saying, can you tell me more about that privilege thing you said I had? And I think that's, so it's the disregarding previous harm and insisting on continued emotional and intellectual and psychological support as we try to figure out where we're finding ourselves in this brave new world.
So you made an amazing post, I think about a week ago. And in that post, you were making an analogy about enslaved women feeding, nursing white children. Can you tell me a little bit more about like what you were thinking or what you were processing when you wrote that?
Yeah, well, I think we had it had been a few days of you and I had some phone conversations where you were telling me about lots of very random people you haven't been in touch with for some of them decades, suddenly DMing you late at night and asking you to either confirm that they're doing the right thing or explain kind of Googleable and basic ideas about how to process privilege. So you had been doing this emotional labor that we had discussed, and then some friends and I were talking about we were engaging on Facebook with a new group of white women who are really committed to doing work, but a lot of us new to doing work to combat racism in our personal lives and our professional lives, and trying to emphasize, hey, we don't need to drag a token black woman in here and have her educate us and hold our hand and all of this stuff, do a whole bunch of work to I don't know, to tell us how to do it the right way and to assure us she knows that our intentions are good, right? And in the midst of sort of all of this hearing about the burdens you were being asked to carry emotionally and intellectually and the free labor you were being asked to do, and then partnering with friends in this group and trying to explain why, no, don't go to your one black friend or their neighbor that you've lived next to for 5 years and you just know from that one party, or don't go seek out the token black people in your life and have them affirm you and absolve you and hold your hand in this. Instead, find white people who are further along that journey to do, and as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about, we are still sort of, to be a little bit crude, sucking at the teat of black wet nurses from when enslaved black women were doing the caretaking of their masters' children. And there's a, in the I think there's some kind of apt illustrations in that metaphor, because when you nurse a child, I think whether it's yours or not, there's a chemical bond that's created, right? And so
I've never nursed a kid, but from what I've heard,
I have nursed one or two, yeah. uh, but so in some ways you can't help but experience love for that child that you're caring for.
Yeah.
And so I think there's so much. I know I've received so much unearned and sometimes undeserved love from the Black women in my life, and whether we're in close relationship or whether we're friendly acquaintances, or even, I'm trying to remember what, oh gosh, going to buy my lunch bagel at the Student Union building at LSU. And my favorite part of my day was the Black lady behind the counter calling me baby, and so I feel like there's been this conditioning, right, of demanding this caretaking and nurturing, but also disregarded labor from Black women, and just soaking it up like a sponge, but not ever maturing beyond being little babies crying for milk as white women,
So, Noah, what you're saying though is that it didn't just start, right? Like it didn't just
Gosh, no.
happen right now. Particularly expecting labor from Black women.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about learning about feminism, right, and starting with the suffragists, right, the suffragettes, right, specifically women working towards the goal of voting, right?
Yeah. And they made a really strategic
And
decision. Yes, sorry.
mm-hmm. No, I'm listening to you. They made a decision to do what?
Well, to drop the enfranchisement of Black women, they could maybe have a better shot at enfranchising at least white women, and so where
because
had
initially
they
because initially, well, I'm just saying because initially they did include Black women into those kind of conversations initially, right?
Yes, right. Yeah, and black women did a lot of the heavy lifting in the suffragette movement, and but they did not get lifted with the suffragette movement. It took a long time later.
It's like Black women are like, okay, we're having these conversations about really needing the right to vote, and while we're doing this, can you all tag along with us to discuss, like, freedom from slavery?
Yeah.
Right. That was a part of that desire to say, hey, we could do two things at the same time.
Yeah.
But for a lot of the white women in the suffragette movement, there was this need to, like you said, silence Black women and to prioritize what white women were trying to achieve at that moment.
Yeah.
I also think that throughout even like second wave women's rights, right? Like we see that show up again in the women's rights movement too.
In the women's march. Yeah,
right. This idea that, like, hey, Black women, we're fighting for equal pay. We're fighting for access to, reproductive justice. But the white women's response, or so many white women, I mean, obviously we can't speak for the whole, was this is the priority, but then Black women were also showing up wanting to talk about their own disenfranchisement and their disempowerment in the United States. I mean, is that something that you remember ever learning about or discussing or talking about?
At the time of the Women's March, I remember being sort of learning that there was a silencing of Black women with we're all women, we all share these experiences, and a lack of acknowledgement of the intersectionality of life as a Black woman, how being a woman and being Black has a unique set of challenges that maybe me as a white woman can relate to a couple of those, but I don't know you know, I don't know, and I can't claim that same life experience or the same authority for what movement leading or anything like that. And I remember that was sort of a stain on the Women's March, was the unwillingness to center and uplift Black narratives and Black female narratives within that protest movement.
I mean, I've never been a white woman, so I'm going to ask you this question. Why do you think the hesitancy has been there for white women? Why do you think the tension exists there for white women?
Well, we'll have to own our stuff at that point, right? I think that we white women are very complicit, sometimes only complicit, sometimes really, really active in promoting and upholding and building up institutions of white supremacy and male patriarchy. And I think that for us to fully include and partner with Black women, we need to recognize and come to terms with and repent of and make reparations for the harm that we've been doing to Black women. And I think we do contemporary harm a huge, if you want to get in a cat fight with a bunch of liberal white ladies, start talking about where they send their kids to school, you know? And every single one of us has very specific reasons why our kids are the exception to we need to integrate schools. But we are, you know, we are that problem. We are upholding these segregated and unequal schools because we've been conditioned to feel that advocating for and prioritizing our children's well-being is our primary responsibility as a mother, and we can't disentangle ourselves. Go ahead.
But even if it happens at the expense of Black children or Black families.
Yeah. And I think, you know, and I think we all are like, and this is, you know, this goes back then maybe to the suffragette movement, where we're like, oh, it's really a shame and I don't feel great about it, but I don't see how I can not prioritize my child's well-being, right? And that's sort of both our vulnerability and our maybe our conceit too. And I think it's a right, because if we think about if the women's suffrage movement had worked for Black women's suffrage, we still would have received suffrage, right? I think it's so it's too bad if we send our kids to an underperforming segregated school and advocate for that in that school, then our kids are going to benefit from our advocacy, but so will the whole rest of that school, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that it's like if we only focus on uplifting ourselves, then we end up carrying a whole bunch of kind of grungy baggage along with us because of our either complicity or our active upholding of systems that we might say that we detest, but we're not willing to make the sacrifice. And I don't think it's always going to be a sacrifice, right? I think we would be surprised that, oh gosh, actually prioritizing somebody lower on the ladder than me meant that I benefited, you know? Not that my benefit should be my motivation, but I don't think we would discover we would lose out by prioritizing someone else's needs over our own.
Well, we talk a lot about what does it mean to govern for the least of these? What does it mean to care for those people in our society that have the least amount of social nets, right? But I was thinking about this, going back kind of to our conversation about labor, even considering that we're in a global pandemic. And what did we see happening, at least the rhetoric we saw a few weeks ago, right? I mean, I don't want to be cliche, but like white women with signs saying, I don't want to cut my own hair, right?
Yeah.
And so this kind of demand for the labor of essential workers. But if we look at the numbers, right, most of the essential workers in the United States are Black and brown folks.
Right.
Right? So again, this idea of the expectation is Black people are always expected to labor on the behalf of white people, and that's just the norm, right?
Exactly.
Which in theory, it's not surprising considering why our ancestors showed up. Right? The major premise of Black people being brought to the United States was to indeed do the stuff that
do the hard
Black
work
people,
that was going to make us rich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or in this case, in the COVID days, go to work and put yourself at arm's, in harm's way, so I don't have to comb my hair. I know there's nuance there, Noelle. I don't want to pretend there isn't.
Right.
But there is a lack of understanding, I think, about the ways in which Black people do labor on the behalf of white people.
Exactly.
But all the time. It's not just, like I said, it's not just this current moment, but there's a history behind that.
Yeah.
How would a white woman, like, how would white people find this out though? Like how does a light bulb come on for white people in this area?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of folks take a couple of different tracks, right? We have a lot of brilliant Black female writers right now who have produced incredible work that's both truth-telling and kind of calling in and some calling out of would-be white allies. So I'm thinking of Ijeoma Olowo's So You Want to Talk About Race, Austin Channing Brown's I'm Still Here, Layla said Me and White Supremacy.
Dang, we both said Layla at the same time.
And then we have more social media influencers like Allie Henny, like Black Women Plant Seeds, like your Anti-Blackness reader, who are providing social media content that challenges us and gives us resources to either continue reading or and then also like just help giving us y'all's perspective that we don't always, we're not always, but
we have to take a pause and acknowledge something here, which according to the New York bestseller list, right?
Yeah.
Who's number one right now? Do you know?
Is it White Fragility?
It's
probably White Fragility. Yeah.
It's a white lady.
Yeah.
Talking about her white fragility.
Yeah. Which, it's not a bad book, but it probably oughtn't to be number one, right? I don't know.
What I mean,
I kind of think that's an expression of our shame, right? There's an element of shame in that stings less or feels less debilitating if we're not having to be vulnerable in the presence of Black thought or a Black person saying, holy shit, I wanted to be a much better person than this and I am not, right? And so at least with another white person, it's like, I know, I've been there too. It sucks. We're the worst. But there's sort of a misery loves company element. I still think it's really wrong and ironic and stupid that.
I mean, it's really ironic.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it's the number one book.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Which brings us to, like, I feel like a really good place to, like, think about rounding our conversation out today.
Yeah.
So we both agree that white women haven't necessarily showed up for Black women now. Correct. Or historically.
Right.
I mean, going back to Sally sending an email. Well, she didn't send an email. She sent a letter. Sally sending the letter.
She sent a text,
asking her to come to El Paso.
Yeah. Yeah.
How can white women show up for Black women now? Is it too late? Can y'all show up for us? I mean, I don't know. Has the time passed?
I think we can. I'm hopeful that we can. Yeah.
How?
How? Pay Black women for their labor, right? So if there's a book, buy the book, right? If there's not a book, find the Patreon. If there's not a Patreon, find their Venmo or their PayPal, Like, are you, Kina, you've got this Hug Your White Friend thing going, you've got your Anti-Blackness reader. How much showing up support has been happening for you?
Maybe people are like saying prayers for me.
Yeah.
For the most part, you know, I have had some people give donations and I'm really, really thankful for it.
Yeah.
But you know, I don't, you know, it's really interesting because you don't do this work. I mean, the overall reason why I'm motivated to do this is so that my nephews can live safe, that my nieces can live safe, that I can live safe, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think in comparison, yeah, when I think about like the thousands of views, you know, that I receive on the videos, you know, in comparison to like the little, you know, the donations that I got that I'm really thankful for, I don't necessarily know. I mean, but maybe the work never balances itself out like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think though, you know, and a lot of us are maybe thinking about what does reparations mean? What does reparations look like? We can do on a very small scale, but still on a meaningful scale, reparations in our individual life. And some of that means giving money to the people whose intellectual and emotional labor are helping pull us out of this swamp of white supremacy that we've been raised in, right?
And you know what? I've actually, so again, I just want to make sure I acknowledge that the people that I've gotten like $5 from, or rather it's $50.
Yeah.
I love it all the same because it's a very affirming thing.
Yeah.
It also helps to build infrastructure because, you know, I don't know how to create a website, but that's neither here or there. But what's really also interesting is that I think, kind of going back to what we've talked about historically, if white people or white women are so used to consuming from Black women, then it wouldn't dawn on you, oh, wait a second, I should probably pay a Black woman for labor. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I could see how it wouldn't even really cross so many people's minds because, again, it's like we consume from Black people. We consume from them in the arts. We consume from them when it comes to music. You know what I'm saying? Like, we think about how many kids are listening to Drake and all the Black rappers out there in relationship to how many of them actually support Black Lives Matter. You get what I'm saying? So I think that white people in particular are so used to consuming for Black people that the idea that the relationship needs to be reciprocal can be challenging for some people.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I think thinking back to the I suppose it's what, third wave, fourth wave feminism, right? But if you think about how there are discussions, right, about how undervalued unpaid labor is, right? So caretaking of elders or caretaking of children, or
the second step that women are expected to do.
Yeah. So wouldn't it benefit everyone engaged in unpaid labor if we start to be sure that the Black women doing unpaid labor, unpaid emotional labor, unpaid physical labor, obviously, and unpaid intellectual labor, are being paid? Like, if we make that shift at the level of the women whose backs upon or breasts upon all of that unpaid labor is founded, right?
Yeah.
Because it's that caregiving. I mean, I think that caregiving is something that, gosh, it's so beautiful. I would love it for it to just be there in its beauty, in a position of honor and gratefulness. And money feels uncouth, right? Because it's gross. Capitalism is gross. But I think we can think about,
is so gross.
Yeah, but it speaks, I guess, in a capitalist society. And definitely don't, right? Like maybe instead of knocking on your Black neighbor's door and saying, hey, I just found out I have white privilege, will you tell me more about that? Maybe just knock on their door and say, hey, I made you a pie, you know?
Which, you know, I want to speak to that too, because for me, making decisions, I don't think a lot of white people might know this, but making decisions to cope